On today's episode of the Pathway to Wellbeing podcast, we are joined by the inspiring Reverend Christine from New Jersey. Together, we are diving deep into a topic close to both our hearts, soulful self-care. Reverend Christine will share her insights on nurturing the soul through spiritual practices and the importance of self-care in our busy lives. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, or check us out at www.sacredu, that's the letter U, .love for more valuable resources. May you enjoy today's conversation and have a beautiful day. Welcome to today's wonderful episode on the Pathways to Wellbeing. And with me, I have the beautiful Reverend Christine, who's joining us all the way from New Jersey. So welcome, Reverend Christine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's a thrill to be here with you.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation because it is something that's very close to my heart on self-care. And really caring for the soul, soulful self-care. I love that. Can I ask you to introduce you and how did you get to where you are now?
Absolutely. So I spend my days working as the director of spiritual care at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Jersey. So I run our chaplaincy department and ensure that patients and families and staff have their spiritual care needs addressed and met. And then on the side, I work as a spiritual director one-on-one with individuals, meeting with them and helping them to assess what's going on in their lives, listening to the spirit together as they usually want to have more of that soulful connection that we talked about before. And when I'm not doing those things, I'm also a mom. I live on a hobby farm, always outside, taking care of chickens or bees or gardening. And the way that I got into this work was really always feeling a pull toward healing in whatever way that looked like. And it began as I was a child and was very interested in the field of medicine. And my mother was a nurse. So I think she really helped foster that idea for me that I wanted to, become a doctor and heal the world in that way. And then when I had some health issues and wound up in the hospital, I met with people who gave me that spiritual care that I was looking for. So it wasn't necessarily the physicians and the diagnoses that helped me, although those things were good too, but it was the recognizing what was going on with me spiritually and emotionally and having others create that space that I hope to create for others these days.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And can you tell me, I'd love to know a little bit for yourself, how do you balance your work with
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about soulful self-care as a topic is because I was a terrible self-care failure for a long time. And it was really by trial and error and a lot of error that I had to recognize, oh, this is a thing. And I have to pay attention to this. And I am not immune from this. And so I've developed lots of different tools and mechanisms that I make sure that I'm putting in place to care for myself from a soulful perspective. So for me, I rely a lot on contemplation. Within the Christian tradition, we have something called centering prayer. I do a lot of that. I do a lot of writing, retreats when I can make those happen with my family and work obligations. And then there's different things that I'm doing throughout my days. So it's spending as much time outside as possible in nature, since that is an area where I can connect very fully with my sense of the spirit. Also making sure that I'm physically active, because as we don't necessarily think of physicality and soul related, but they all are. And I know something about myself is that if I am in movement, I tend to feel better all around. So it's carving out really simple practices and making sure that I'm taking the space and the grace for myself, just as I try to put that forth for others.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And isn't nature so caring and so nurturing? I'm so grateful that I get to live in nature. All I have to do is look outside and I'm surrounded by trees. And we can go there when we just need time out. And I think nature is very healing, very things like
Yeah,
that.
it's a way that I think we can walk the soul back home in a very short amount of time to really connect with ourselves and then all that is around us and bigger than us. And people may have different ways that they engage that from their own spiritual perspectives. You even look at the research in terms of what it does to our mood and to our brainwaves and the benefits health-wise, just a simple time outside.
Absolutely. I totally agree. We could live in nature totally away from technology. I think we'd be a very different planet, a very different planet. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'd love to know, in your work, what do people experience? What are some common obstacles that people experience in being able to really go within and care for the soul?
Yeah, so I think the first piece is recognizing that self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And I think a lot of us, and like I said, I was there, are in denial that we actually have to care for ourselves. But it's something that we all need, that no one is immune from. And then I think that, and I have some slides on this, I can share my screen. The second biggest barrier, I think, is not necessarily not knowing what we should do or having a list of things to do, but really, why aren't we doing those things? What is going on for us what's getting in the way of caring for ourselves and not doing the things that we know that we could or should do? So I think that there are lots of different stumbling blocks as to why we don't do that which we know is good for us. And so I wrote a whole article about this and have it on my website as well as my newsletter. 7 self-care stumbling blocks. Why don't we do those things that we know that is good for us? But then I also wanted to talk a little bit about the realms for soul nourishment, because I think sometimes when we think of self-care, it's gotten so commodified these days. It's all about going to the spa or having a bubble bath, and I love those things. But it's also not just this once in a while luxury that we're engaging in. It's really meant to be throughout different realms of our life. And this is where I think capitalism has figured out, particularly for women and for women who are caregivers, either professionally or personally, oh, we can just sell them a fancy candle and tell them that's what they need to feel better, or a sheet mask or something like that. But what I'm talking about goes a lot deeper and beyond just those basic things. So, different realms for soul nourishment that I propose. First is that which is spiritual, which I would say is the connection with the divine or the sacred, however you identify. So for some people, that's going to be God. For others, that will be spirit. That might be the universe, whatever brings your soul in connection with who you are. So as we were talking about before, for some, it might be nature. That might be the way of having that connection. Another realm is mind. So it's learning and reading, expanding one's worldview, really going beyond your day-to-day experiences, but having new experiences that can enrich you. We talked a little bit about physical, like that's a way that I tend to need to focus sometimes for myself. So something as simple as sleeping and not waking up at 2 in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep. And of course, these are more of the obvious ones too, right? The eating healthy, the exercise. We're used to people talking about that, but it does connect deeply to our soul as well. Another realm for soul nourishment I find is social life-giving relationships, which I think for a lot of our audience, they might be really good at having one-way relationships where people are taking from them because they're natural givers. And what I'm talking about is making sure that you have relationships that don't just deplete you, but relationships that are mutual, where you are getting as much as you are giving, because otherwise I think those one-sided relationships can really drain us. So having that connection to others is important. And then another realm that we don't talk about so much when we think about self-care and the soul is play. having an unwinding or a creativity or really embracing something childlike in our lives and doing something not for productivity, but for pure enjoyment. And so I challenge people to think about all of these realms, the spiritual, the mind, the physical, the social, and the play. And for some, you might think, oh, I'm doing an excellent job in this one, right? And for others, you might think, oh, this isn't resonating with me as much. I wonder if there's more I can lean into here. And there will be differences. And I think that's another reason why soulful self-care can be difficult, because we can see lists of things that we could do to care for ourselves, but they're not all going to resonate. For instance, my husband, he's really good in the mind nourishment. He will read 15 books on the Civil War at one time. And that is not going to bring my soul rest. That is not going to be fulfilling for me, but that's what is fulfilling for him. So we have to figure out within each of these what really speaks to us and connects to us, and how do we engage that realm fully and balance out the realms also.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I totally agree with it all, especially the play. We live in such a world today where it's so serious. I think in general, myself included, and as a generalization, we have forgotten how to play.
Absolutely. Even my children, I have a 8 and a 10-year-old. They don't always know how to play because they're not given the opportunities to do. And we squash our imagination from such a young age because we're so focused on success and productivity, and not allowing our imagination the room to just see what occurs, right? We're used to filling it up so much. And so I've had a number of people ask me, how do I get in touch with the play again? I'm very serious. I don't know how to do that. And I understand I'm wired that way also. And one of the things I like to propose to people is, what did you do when you were 8 years old? What did you find yourself doing if you had a summer afternoon? What were your go-to ways of being in the world? And seeing if there's an opportunity to connect back with some of those. I was talking to someone I work with, a spiritual direction, and she used to tap dance as a young age, and she had in probably 35 years. And she went out and got some tap shoes and decided she was going to engage in that playfulness. And it also speaks to the body and the physicality realm of nourishment. So sometimes these realms can overact. And if she were to have gone to a tap dancing class, she didn't, but if she were to, that would have also interacted with the connection to others realm. So it's not that we have to be doing all these different things, but when we engage in one, we can pull some of the other realms on and weave them into it.
Absolutely agree. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you have some really nice questions that we can ask ourselves here.
Yeah, so I came up with some soulful self-care questions that I think speak to the dynamics of what our care could look like, that I would invite our listeners to just think about for themselves. So when we're thinking about restorative soul care, the question that I would have you ask yourself is, what helps you reconnect to your authentic self? Again, that's going to look different for everyone. And it might be that 8-year-old self that we were talking about before, but what helps you to feel in tune with who you are? So that's one question. And then the next question underneath that would be like, okay, how can we do those things, right? Or why aren't we doing those things? But really investigating, who am I and how do I connect with who I am in my essence? Another dynamic that I encourage people to look at is protective self-care. So the question that I have there for you to think about is, how do you set boundaries to ensure that you are not depleted? Because sometimes our soul care is the ways in which we're engaging in the world with that proactive stance of saying, this is a relationship, for example, that I talked about before, that is life draining for me. And I can give this person a little bit of my time, but I can't give them all of my time. And so how do I recognize those spaces and places in my life that are not filling to me, Yet I still may have to do them, especially if you're related to these people or you have a job that is draining in a lot of ways. And how do you place some parameters around that so it doesn't take all of you and so that you don't reach that point of depletion or completely empty gas tank? And then I encourage people to think about care for your future self, because sometimes when we think about soul care, we're thinking about in the moment, right? Where we might be thinking about, okay, I'm going to meditate. I'm going to rest in this particular moment and connect with myself, which is lovely, which is what we're talking about. But we're also talking about what can you do today to care for yourself tomorrow? So this could be something as simple as I don't love doing laundry, but I know if I do the laundry today, then we will all have clean clothes throughout the week. And that's one less thing that is weighing on me or that I'm worried about. Or I don't necessarily love going to the dentist, but I know if I set that appointment for myself, I will ultimately benefit in all sorts of aspects. I will feel like I can smile to the people that I'm working with because I've had my teeth cleaning and all that sort of thing. So it's those things that we don't necessarily want to do or think of doing, but that are important to do as a part of the work. And someone pointed out to me, this could also be planning a vacation. You can plan a vacation for yourself today. You're not going to benefit from it today, but in 3 months from now, your future self will have thanked you for giving them that gift. And then the other dynamic that I like to point out to people is we sometimes get into this vortex when we're thinking about caring for ourselves that is really more of a numbing than it is engaging. So, for instance, when I've had a hard day at the hospital or I know that there's been a difficult death, I might say to the nurses, how are you going to care for yourself after this if they've been witness to this suffering? And without fail, they tell me, they're like, oh, I'm going to pour myself an extra large glass of wine tonight. I'm like, okay, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. Or I work with a lot of younger individuals that will binge Netflix for hours on end. That's more of an escaping and a numbing. And yeah, you may have days where you might need to do a little bit of that, but it is a problem when that becomes our go-to mode of caring for ourselves. We're not thinking of those previous questions of our authentic self, our depletion, our caring for ourselves tomorrow. So my last question that I want to engage people with around this is, how are you present in your care instead of distracted by your pain? And that can be a difficult one because that can sometimes take away some of these coping mechanisms that we've put in place that are really no longer serving us.
Thank you. And it's so very true. I mean, we get distracted so much, and I agree with you. Like, I used to live in a meditation center and run silence retreats, and we had people come up to say, like, we don't want to be in silence because we're in silence all day because they live by themselves. But you say, well, do you watch TV? And they go, yeah, we've got the TV on. I go, that's not silent because we're distracting ourselves from that. So I agree. We're very good. I call it a pandemic of being a human doing.
Oh, yes. A
We're
doing versus a being.
very good
Yeah.
at doing things rather than just caring for ourselves and tuning in to what is needed. What our body needs, what our soul needs. So thank you so much for sharing that. It was really wonderful. Can I ask you, Reverend Christine, if we can go back, like you mentioned all about the mind and how your husband likes to read, which is really good. But can you recommend or suggest any other mindful exercises that can help us, especially in busy days? You know, people say, I don't have time because I'm so busy. And sometimes that does happen realistically. We do have a lot to do in our life. So how can we still do the doing, but be mindful at the same time?
Yeah, sometimes I recommend, especially if you have really small things that you're looking to add to your day, and you don't have, sometimes my clients are like, I want to meditate, but I don't have an hour to meditate every day. You don't need an hour. You can do something that I like to call soul care habit stacking. So the idea is, what is something that you are already doing that we can infuse some care of yourself in that. So for instance, it could be something as simple as, when I'm washing my hands before I'm cooking or after I've used the facilities, I'm saying a prayer during that time, or I'm taking some deep breaths and doing some box breathing at the same time that I'm washing my hands. And I'm just using that as a cue. Or I've had people that tell me, oh, I like doing journaling, but I never think to do it. I say, okay, how about we put your journal by your coffee maker? And so when you're having your coffee in the morning and you're waiting for it to brew, you have a few moments to journal during that time. So it can be more about fitting it in, and it can also be more about the mindset of having this swirling about within you during your day. So as we're talking about the coffee example, there's a difference if I am making my coffee, sitting outside, listening to the bird song and thinking about what's going to happen throughout my day and savoring the blends of the beans that we specially order because that's my vice. Or I could be spilling it out of my cup while I'm running to get my kids to the bus. And then by the time I go back to it, it's cold, right? It's the same act, but sometimes our intention around it can be so different. And that can really set us up to care for ourselves a little bit better. And then you asked specifically about the mind in that. What are some other ways to engage mindful, the mind in the self-care piece? So yes, I am not reading books on the Civil War, but I think anytime you're learning something new, that is an engagement of your mind. So it doesn't mean that you have to take a course or get a degree. It could be something like reading an article that has around something that you're interested in, but you didn't know that much. I had a directee of mine take a beer tasting course because they didn't know much about beer and they wanted to learn more about beer. And then they learned about all these hops and this production. And part of what they were talking about was just like the excitement of knowing these new things that they never knew before. So you might not even think of putting that into the mind category, but I would say that it could be. Or as we're talking about planning a trip, it could also be traveling, right? Or taking a different route home, even from work, is going to engage your mind in a different way to really expand your horizons. Or you could be like me and do the crossword every day. That is my tend to really engage in my mind in that particular realm.
Thank you. And I totally agree with that. And just another question, if I may, is you mentioned being authentic. So what does living authentically mean to you?
So I think it's recognizing what my values are, and mine happen to be around connection, around vulnerability, around spirituality. Those are things that drive me, around listening and empathy. And then seeing how am I in tune with those throughout my daily life, right? Are all the meetings that I'm doing somewhat aligned with that? Are the friendships that I have, are they similar or different to some of those values? So I think it goes back to knowing when I feel at that state of contentment for myself. And this is where friends and families can help because they know when you're out of whack. And I teach a lot of this at the hospital too. And I said, your coworkers can tell you when you're not feeling fully yourself and you're not caring for yourself as well as you can, and being able to be open to hearing that from others and even inviting it in to say, I need you to help hold me accountable to when I'm not seeming like I'm my full authentic self. So I think eliciting that feedback from others can be really helpful as we return to who we are.
Absolutely. Again, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before we finish up, can I ask you, how can people contact you, or how can people work with you if they're interested in doing
Of
that?
course. So the best space to visit would be my website, which is Christine V as in Victor, and then my last name, Davies. And I believe you can probably put that in the show notes. And on there, there's a contact form so people can work with me individually if they're looking for a spiritual director. I do that over Zoom all over the world. So it doesn't matter where you are. If you happen to be in New Jersey, you're welcome to come to my office and meet with me in person, but most folks are not in this area. And then I also have a weekly-ish newsletter on there where I'm writing about different spiritual practices, as well as different self-care advice and tips and dynamics. So I would invite people to sign up for that. And you can also go and read previous articles on there.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And Reverend Christine, is there any other questions that I could have asked you?
No, I am impressed that knowing what time it is where you are, I think this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it and to share a little bit more with the community.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much. Has been a joy. I'd really love to talk to you again. There is so much about soulful and self-care and caring for the self, caring for others, absolutely, but really going into and caring for ourselves on a deep level, even if it's just emotionally.
Yeah, it is hard to do, but so very necessary to sustain the caregiving that we're doing.
Absolutely. So thank you. Thank you ever so much for joining us. And of course, for anyone who is watching us on the replay or listening to this podcast, do click on the links below and contact Reverend Christine, even if it is just for a chat, and which is taking time out and caring for yourself. Thank you.